So it is a very intensive day, but now we try to conclude with this interesting panel because after the scientific data, the ethical issue, the legal aspect, and so a very rich day, we try to hear or listen to from the religions in which way they approach the problem, the issue of DNA, genome, gene editing or gene therapy, which kind of perspective coming from 4 different traditions, religious traditions. So we have a Christianity, we have the Jewish tradition, the Buddhist tradition, and the Islamic tradition. So 4 voices that we think could offer a very interesting insights, perspective, and contribution in our interdisciplinary approach and discussion. So we have a first round, for short, about 5 minutes for each speaker, a second round of reply and clarification, and then we open the discussion to the participants, not only in this room, but all the people that are online and they are following our meeting. I received 1 hour in the past, in the afternoon, early in the afternoon, email from Japan. She's looking at our meeting and with a lot of interest about our discussion. So,
yes, thank you, Renzo. We asked our participants of this interreligious panel to give a brief 5-minute statement about the meaning of the genome in their respective religious tradition and whether we as a scientific community should intervene on the DNA of organisms. So this is what we are going to hear at first, and we would like to start with the Christian tradition, and I would like to introduce Emmanuel Agius to you, who is professor of moral theology and philosophical ethics at the University of Malta. He's the former head of the Department of Moral Theology at the Faculty of Theology, former member of 15 years of the European Group of Ethics in Science and New Technology, and also a member of the Pontifical Academy for Life. Professor Agius is the author and co-editor of several publications, and we are very happy to have you here and are very interested in what you're about to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. I hope you will have all the stamina to continue to discuss and to listen. Thank you very much for inviting me to this round table on the religious point of view. Before I answer the 2 questions you raised, namely, what does Christianity say about the genome in general, particularly the human genome, and whether that is what criteria or norm does Christian faith provide, I would like to focus first of all about the importance of religions in this discussion, because religion is part of culture and it offers one's self-perception and one's relationship with nature. So I think we cannot rely only on scientific issues, but we need a horizon of interpretation of what goes around, including in the scientific world. The definition of Christianity or Christian faith, the traditional definition is faith-seeking understanding. And faith-seeking understanding does not mean that faith without reason, nor reason without faith, but there is a dialectical dialogue between reason and faith. And I think the contribution which Christian faith can give to such pertinent and contentious discussion on human genome is the hermeneutical approach, and there is a 3-layered approach how Christian faith can listen and dialogue, because I think the believer must be both a listener. Earlier on we said the importance of listening, but listening to the human experience. The human experience is a source of theologizing, a source of reflecting on Christian faith. The rationality there is not to be opposed, but to be interpreted from a faith horizon. From a Christian point of view, there is a three-layered hermeneutical model. First of all, the importance of integrating the dialogue we have. Sorry, I have the presentation, but I think in 5 minutes, let's forget it. Okay, but I will send it to the participants, but I will leave the paper because I thought I have 20 minutes for my presentation. So it's useless to read it. I think there are three approaches. First of all, the integration. What is happening? What can Christian faith, like the other faiths, how can we integrate that within our tradition? Secondly, there is a stimulation. That means raising further discussions and questions in order to deepen the meaning of experience of gene editing. And thirdly, a constructive criticism, namely of raising the right questions in order to improve the technological intervention. The first question is the genome in a Christian perspective. The biblical narrative, I think, is very important. That is the root of the three monotheistic religions. And the biblical narrative of creation gives us the integration of what is happening within Christian faith. God is the author of the universe. God is the author of the genome in general. But at the same time, it would be a mistake, I think, to interpret the human genome simply from a biological, chemical point of view. Because though the human genome shares 89% with the rest of the genomes occurring in other organisms, the human person is unique because the human person is more than the chemical, biological issues. The human person is an imaginative, thinking, communicative, decision-making being. And I think to encompass and to try to define a human being simply from a genetic point of view, a genomic point of view, does not make sense. So the metaphor we find in the Bible that the human person, we should not interpret the human person as a collection of tissues and cells from a genomic point of view, but the human person is created in imago Dei, the image of God. And the image of God, insofar, not only because God is the creator of the genome in general, but also because the human person participates in beyond the material genetic aspect, but also the spiritual aspect. The human genome as a whole is a vestigium Dei. That means the footprints where you see the dynamic and creative aspect of God and the ingenuity of God. But as I said, the human person is more than that. So the human dignity from an anthropological point of view helps us to unlock the proper significance of the human genome. Christian faith stimulates to raise pertinent questions about the genomics, which the first contours is given by the genetic aspect. Epigenetics is very important because we cannot rely on the significance of the human person simply from the genetic aspect. We have to go to the spiritual aspect, but as human persons, we have the responsibility to be stewards of God. Stewards of God because the human genome, like the rest of the genome, depends on the environmental issues which surround the different organisms. So epigenetics has shown that thousands of genes collaborate during the human development in interaction with the environment. And I think when we talk about the human genome from a Christian point of view, we do need to understand the role of stewardship, of responsibility, because the genome of every organism depends on a healthy environment. The second point, which I want to raise briefly, is should we intervene in the human genome? First of all, we have to distinguish between the language which is used, the sanctity of the human genome, or the dignity of the human genome. That is, I think, it's a fallacy. It's what Gilbert Ryle, the British philosopher, said, it's a category mistake. We have to distinguish between the dignity of the human embryo and the dignity of the human genome, in the sense that if we say that the human genome is sacred, that there is no intervention, this is a false. We have a responsibility to intervene and to bring to perfection what God has created, because God has given us and wants us to be co-sharers, co-responsibility with creation. And I think what Paul Ramsey has said long ago in his book, The Fabricated Man, The Ethics of Genetic Control, there is a fundamental obligation in order to cooperate with God in improving the human genome. Also, very briefly, the idea of human perfection. When we talk about gene editing techniques and perfection, we are afraid. It's not true. Christianity is not against human genome techniques, because perfection, we have to understand it in the right perspective. When we think about perfection in human gene editing techniques as making human life as a commodity, as a purchasable thing, that is the problem. When we try to do a perfect baby according to the cultural understanding of what we mean by perfection, because perfection means, according to the teleology, the inbuilt purpose built within the different organisms, and to help them to reach their final aim. That is, I think, what gene editing is doing in trying to help people to become healthier, to eliminate. The Christian faith offers a normative approach, yes, distinguishing between the therapeutic and also the enhancement issues. The Christian faith promotes the human person, and obviously the question of natural must be interpreted correctly. The question of the commodification of the human embryo is a crucial problem. The Christian faith does not accept that, because human life starts from the beginning. Also, I would like to conclude, really the last point, what Pope Francis said in his economic forum of Davos in 2018. There is a grave responsibility to exercise wise discernment for the decisions made well, to be decisive for shaping the world of tomorrow and that of future generations. Thus, if we want a more secure future, one that encourages the prosperity of all, then it is necessary to keep the compass continually oriented towards the true north, represented by authentic values. Now is the time to take courageous and bold steps for our beloved planet. This is the right moment to put into action our responsibility to contribute to the development of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is difficult to remain the time, but also for you, Professor Genazzani, you have more time, okay, because we need to respect all the speakers, but not too much, but a little more. And Professor Andrea Genazzani is a full professor of obstetrics and gynecology at University of Pisa. Now is emeritus, but is still very active. He was a professor and director for many years in different also university, and he received several honoris causa laurea in Poland, in Romania, in Greece, and he is coming from the Jewish tradition, the Jewish perspective. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much. And then, I am from Jewish tradition, a professor of OBGYN, always interested in life, what is our destiny. And as you know, as it is in Jewish tradition, we have direct contact and direct responsibility versus God in what we are doing and how we are doing. And then I'm sorry, I have prepared some slides, I will go faster, but I would like to start with this introduction that is important to those who practice reproductive techniques to learn about different religious perspectives related to reproductive health problems. And religious groups are active in influencing the public with bioethical position, and this is particularly evident with issues concerning procreation, abortion, and infertility therapy. And the development in reproductive medicine raise now new ethical questions for different religions that do not always have clear answers. Religious leaders in some countries still exert a powerful influence in the development and practice of reproductive technologies. And in some countries, religious groups' main influence will stem from their direct influence on medical protocols. And therefore, it is important for practitioners in the field of reproductive medicine to understand attitude toward reproduction that derive from different religions. And the Jewish law is the full Jewish law is the halakha. The halakha, this word is derived from the Hebrew root that means to go or to walk. It's the collective body of Jewish religious law, including the biblical law, where 613 mitzvot or commandments are present, and the later Talmudic and rabbinic law as customs and tradition. You can see from that one, we are a religion based on the interpretation of the words. And always that we read the words. With the advancement of science, we look inside and we have the impression that it was already written there, what we are now facing. The written law, the Torah, the first 5 books of the scripture, which are the original authority, and the dominant part of the oral law are the Mishnah, the Talmud, the post-Talmudic code, and the responsa. Just to give you some information, you know that the Torah is the foundation of the written law, and the origin of authority is the Torah, the first 5 books of the scripture. And as stated above, the written law is defined as the origin of authority. This definition is derived from the ancient tradition and belief concerning the original revelation on Mount Sinai, when God ascribed the Torah to Moses and to the Jewish people, the recipients. The Torah is not an ordinary text of law. It is an expression of God's revelation, teaching and guidance for men. The attitude to the Torah is therefore as to a unique and holy divine text, which includes moral values as well as practical law. The oral law interprets, expands, and elucidates the written Torah and regulates new rule and custom. Its authority is derived from the written Torah. And the Mishnah, I would like to remind you that the Mishnah, they are approximately 3 centuries after the final compilation of the Mishnah. The Greek interpreter studied the 6 orders of the Mishnah and wrote a monumental composition, which is the Talmud. The Talmud, the Greek interpreters included within the Talmud commentaries and interpretative studies of the Mishnah, the Midrashim, or investigation, and establish regulation and new custom. You can see here, this is a text which had an evolution going on with the time. The Amoraim in Babylon composed the Babylonian Talmud, while the Amoraim in Holy Land composed the Jerusalem Talmud. And during the period of Jewish sovereignty in Judea, laws were made by the Synedrium, a body of 71 leaders gathered for this purpose and by local courts with 23 judges. After the fall of the Second Temple, I'm sorry I go in that one, but it's important for us. Halakha became primarily the creation of rabbinic Judaism. And, the post-Talmudic code, an enormous amount of Talmudic knowledge was essential for accurate ruling. These post-Talmudic codes were compiled with the intention of assisting access to the laws, regulation, and custom of the Talmudic halakha. Up to the 16th century, different scholars summarized and reviewed the halakhic conclusion of the Talmud in the post-Talmudic codes. Among the scholars were Rashi, 1040, 11.5, Rabbi Moshe ben Nacham, and Rabbi Menachem ben Shlomo Hameiri. And the most prominent post-Talmudic code are the Shelihot, the Halachot, Maimonides, and Pishkei Arosh and Shulchan Arush. Then we had the responsa, and the responsa of the various attitudes of rabbinic, the responsa still continue. of rabbinic scholars about the way a halakha should be applied in changing world is analyzed and discussed with regard to the legal cause. Through the ages, written opinion has been given by qualified authority in question about all aspects of Jewish law. The responsa is a term usually confined to written replies given to question on all aspects of Jewish law by qualified authorities from the time of the latter geonym to the present day. About 1,000 volumes are containing more than 500,000 separate responsa appeared. And contemporary rabbinic scholars deal with a new problem that arises with the investigation and treatment of infertility. This is the actual point. The response of later rabbinic authority are often short monographs in which every text remotely relevant or to the point at issue is quoted or discussed. The different groups have developed among Jewish from ancient time and especially in the modern era. We have the Orthodox, the Reform and Conservative. The Orthodox is the only movement formally and legally recognized in Israel. And just as take-home message related to our present topic, genetic engineering are permissible in Judaism when used for the treatment or prevention of diseases. Such genetic manipulation is not considered to be a violation of God's natural law. The Judaism rejects the idea of creating a more valuable person through genetic engineering because it's not put a relative value on human beings. Judaism does not permit the alteration of manipulation of physical traits and characteristics such as eye and hair color, facial features, and the like, when such changes provide no useful benefit to mankind. Eugenics is forbidden. I'm sorry. And according to Halakha, human beings serve as partner with God in the creation process, but do not have absolute autonomy in utilizing medical intervention. Specific Halakhic guidelines delineate when patient autonomy is followed or when a Jew must submit to God's law. And in that sense, I think that everything can be done for health, for patient, for prevention and treatment of diseases, but nothing can be done to ameliorate what's already done perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, because there was a very interesting presentation of all the Jewish approach, the Torah and Mishnah and Talmud.
Just to mention.
It is very important to know the sources and in which way you arrive to some guidelines or conclusion, or in which way to understand the autonomy and responsibility about these issues. Thank you very much, but we have also, after the first round, a short reply to complete the presentation, because now we have the third voice coming from the Buddhist tradition, and is Professor Guido Giordano. He's a full professor at the Department of Science of the University of Roma III here, and his background is in heart science, and he is the chairperson of the scholar board of the Italian Buddhist Institute, Soka Gakkai. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm going to read because 5 minutes, big questions. 7, 8. So I would like first to wholeheartedly thank the organizers for inviting and the conveners of this very interesting conference. I have really learned a lot today, as well as the distinguished colleagues who take part to this important panel, which is the World Religion's Views about Bioethics. So I'm here today, not for my scientific background, but in representation of the Italian Buddhist Institute Soka Gakkai. The Soka Gakkai's tradition represents one out of many within Buddhism. However, they all share a deep common foundation, which I trust I will be able to convey in representation of a shared Buddhist view about life. The challenges placed by new frontiers in the engineering of life push continuously forward the need for religions to confront themselves with the new ethical issues and to dig deeper into the roots of their principles, so as to provide the framework in supporting science, individuals, and society as a whole. And I have to say that I feel that there are a lot of consonances in the views that have been expressed today. Therefore, we need to look into the Buddhist teachings exposed in historical texts and commentaries to derive an ethics of life which can be applicable to modern challenges. In the specific, this presentation is based on Daisaku Ikeda's dialogues and essays. Mr. Ikeda is the founding president of the Soka Gakkai International, philosopher, peace builders, and founder of a number of international institutions promoting peace, culture, and education worldwide. Buddhism is a holistic religion for which an individual's existence is the temporary expression of the universal life, from which is inseparable, essentially forming a unity. Like all forms of life, individual human existences continuously emerge and manifest themselves as physical forms represented by our bodies. However, we are also composed of intangible aspects, such as our personal character. And both tangible and intangible aspects are subjected to a lifelong transformation, from conception to return to latency at death. Physical and spiritual aspects are not separated but mutually connected, as much as they are fully interconnected with the environment and interdependent upon the universal life, which pulses according to the fundamental law of cause and effect, which includes everybody and everything. Buddhism shares a causal and positive view of life, for which individual conditions at birth, including the genome, the family and country of provenance, the historical period, are not random. On the contrary, they express the purpose of each individual existence, which, according to Buddhism, is to create value no matter what those initial conditions are, however hard, in a transformative process that Daisaku Ikeda calls the human revolution. The dignity of life derives from the potential for each single person, whatever her or his condition, to develop such a revolution whereby one manifests as a Buddha, which expresses the condition of individuals' enlightenment about life, thus contributing to a positive transformation of the society overall. Hence, the classic dichotomies health, illness, sufferance, joy, ability, disability cannot be predefined, nor are they unchangeable during the course of a single existence. The role of the genome in defining such conditions is just one out of many players, as well stated already in the UNESCO Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights of 2005. Also, these conditions are not to be solely applied to the individual, but they involve communities at large. For example, on how much societal acceptance, support, and care are offered to those who face the harshness of a genetic pathology. Within this framework, I can now briefly come to the specific of the ethical aspects of genome engineering. As life has the inherent potential to be worth of being lived, medical, ethical, spiritual, religious efforts are essential to improve its quality and support our decision, both at individual and societal levels. Most importantly, for each decision, such as whether the scientific community should or should not intervene on the DNA of organism, it should be fully and openly clarified why this should be needed. That is, the true motivations at the core of the actions. Some presentation before placed the issues of right questions. The answer to this very same question can be and have been dramatically different across cultures and have produced very different effects. Buddhism encourages a continuous multidisciplinary, multicultural, and multi-religious dialogue on genome-related bioethical issues, taking into account that DNA should not be treated in a simple mechanistic way, because human life is a complex and interrelated set of phenomena with an immense potential. Science, philosophy, and religions should indeed cooperate to contribute to shape modern, inclusive, humanistic societies in which the inherent dignity of each individual life of sentient and insentient beings is the sole scope of human activities. Under this lens, we should collectively find along the way those self-regulations that allow genetic research to progress, limiting the intervention to those aspects that are utterly and truly in support of individual life. My acknowledgements go to the organizers of this conference for laying down a milestone in interdisciplinary and interreligious dialogue about such important contemporary matter. And I would like to conclude by reading an excerpt by Daisaku Ikeda from his book of dialogues with Guy Bourgeot, professor of ethics at the University of Montreal, published in 2000. So it's an era ago for bioethics, but maybe it still holds. So says Mr. Ikeda, returning to the Buddhist concept of the supreme dignity of life, it is necessary to use the utmost caution in using technologies capable of manipulating human existence. If in the future genetic therapy will progress enough to offer solutions to certain problems, then it may become an option, but first it must be studied with attention and professionalism to establish the best methods of use. Of course, every precaution must be taken to prevent it from degenerating into manipulation of people for non-therapeutic purposes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Of course, it's not so. So we thank a lot of the speaker because in a short time to present the view, to understand the criteria, the approach, this perspective of the universal life, and to enter in the specific topic of genetics is not easy. Thanks a lot because all the speakers.
Yeah, it's quite a challenge. I would like to welcome now from Istanbul University, Professor İlhan İlkiliç, who is going to give us insight into what the Islamic thought has to say to our research and to the question of engineering life. İlhan İlkiliç has studied medicine philosophy, Islamic science and Oriental philology in Istanbul, Bochum and Tübingen, so quite some stations also in Germany. He was guest professor at the University of Frankfurt and is currently professor of history of medicine and ethics at the Istanbul University, Istanbul Medical Faculty. He's a member of many committees and was a member of the German Ethics Council from 2012 to 2020, and his special interests include genetics and ethics, intercultural medical ethics, and Islamic bioethics. Welcome.
Thank you very much at first for invitation and kind introduction. So it is for me also a big challenge as a last speaker of the day, but I will give my best. When the meaning of the genome is evaluated according to the Islamic tradition, first of all, the human genome should be evaluated as a biological part of the human being. Humankind, on the other hand, is the most valuable creature that God has created, and he is at the top of the hierarchy of creatures. We use in Arabic Ashraf-i Mahlukat, it means the most honorable being. Therefore, human beings and every human's organs, tissues, and cells are valuable and sacred. However, when certain conditions are met, intervention or research on the human body, organs, and genome is morally acceptable and justifiable. Scientific research and bioengineering, on the other hand, must have ethically legitimate goals, for example, to treat disease or to conduct important scientific research. Muslim theologians say that a person also carries the value of all humanity and is the bearer of human dignity. The following Quran verse provides this argument. We read in Quran chapter 5, verse 32, "Who saved the life of one, it shall be as if he had saved the life of all humankind," and vice versa. Can we use the same arguments also in bioengineering and research on the human genome? The answer to this question requires further answer to another question. Is the moral status of the human genome different from other human cells and tissues. As you know, we had similar discussion in the Western world in the 90s in the context of genetic exceptionalism. So we heard in some presentation this word. Genetic exceptionalism argues that genetic information is different from other medical information, and therefore it should be evaluated differently from an ethical point of view. Although this view has been criticized, there are scholars who accept it. Even though genetic information has numerous spatial features like uniqueness, predictive power, kinship power, and so on, I think that genetic information is not categorically different from other medical information. Rather, the difference is gradual. In determining the moral status of the human genome, these features must be considered. The second part of the question sent to me was, should we intervene on the DNA of organisms? The answer to this question is related to my comments. In other words, the moral status of the DNA or genome and its difference from other molecules and cells play an important role in this answer. As a Muslim ethicist, I don't think that the intervention in DNA or genome is categorically wrong. Some years ago, in a similar situation, when I was a member of the German Ethics Council, I voted accordingly. In terms of Islamic philosophy and morality, the very important question here is intervention in the genome also an intervention in the creation of God? It is possible to affect the health of future generations with an intervention in the genome germline. However, the intervention must be viewed ontologically different from God's creation. Therefore, according to Islamic belief, a physician or researcher cannot play God, as we heard these arguments, for example, in another presentation, playing God is, according to Islamic philosophy, not possible. From the perspective of Islamic ethics, it is rather important whether these interventions in the human genome can be morally legitimized. They can then be morally legitimized if they are safe, necessary, useful, fair, and responsible. I would like to emphasize at the end of my speech the following point. According to the Islamic image of humankind, health is a very important good and value, but it is not the source of ethical norms and principles. I think this point is very important. So the health, it is not the source of ethical norms and principles. It must therefore be weighed against other ethical goods and values. This ethical reflection has consequences for the moral evaluation of the intervention in the human germline and human genome. So I'm coming to my conclusions. As a result, according to Islamic ethics, seeing the genome as intrinsically sacred and categorically refusing to intervention in it is not correct. But interventions in the genome must have an ethically high goals that can be achieved. This can be for curing a disease, but also for obtaining very important scientific results. Other ethical criteria in this regard are that the interventions must be safe, necessary, useful, fair, and responsible. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot for this very interesting, open perspectives that are very important in our approach and discussion. Please, if you can offer a short integration or something to explain a little better the specific issue of genetics and genome and so, because it is important the sources and the approach, but for example the concrete experience in Christian or Catholic tradition or Buddhist at the practical level or in the real concrete context of these therapies or non-therapeutic approach, which kind of contribution to maintain this important perspective?
I think what is interesting in the presentations we have heard, the three monastic religions with the Buddhist approach, is the commonality about this faith perspective, in the sense of a sense of respect for the genome, that when we talk about the human genome, it's more than what is physical, what is material. There is always something higher than that, and that is throughout the four presentations. And also what is common is that the human genome, though it's created by God, Yahweh, Allah, or an expression of life in general, as Buddhism states, but at the same time, no approach in our presentation has stated that the genome is so sacred that no intervention at all could be implemented. The point is, I think when we come to this point, is to what extent could an intervention, what do we mean by intervention, and what type of interventions are permissible? So we are talking in a very general way. From a Christian point of view, we have the tradition, the normative approach, that the human person created in God's image has a special value in terms of the other genomic organizations, though we share 98% of the genetic system. The human person, when we come to interventions, it's morally acceptable to intervene in order to improve human life in the sense of therapeutic interventions. But when we come to germline, in somatic, in the sense, so the Christian perspective distinguishes between the therapeutic and non-therapeutic interventions. Therapeutic interventions, it's part of perfection. What do you mean by perfection? Non-therapeutic, in terms of enhancement, that is objectionable, because we are changing the very nature of human person, especially when by perfection we mean something which is negotiable, because perfection is so much culturally conditioned. This is when we start considering the dignity of the human person in terms of physical aspect, which leads to a throwaway culture. At the same time, as the sense of responsibility, precaution, foresight, it's part of responsibility, future generations does come in, especially when we talk about germline interventions, because there are so much knowledge gaps, there are so much uncertainty, that a logical conclusion from Christian faith and responsibility is the sense of an ethics of responsibility. And an ethics of responsibility, unless we are safe in the interventions we are doing, we cannot pass them on to future generations. So I think both in the research aspect and clinical aspect of germline interventions, they are all fraught with serious ethical conventions, issues, because in basic research, in terms of germline techniques, we are using so many embryos in order to reach that aim. And also when we come to the clinical intervention, obviously we are discarding embryos and we are putting future generations in a very precarious situation. So from a practical point of view, this is the main framework of the Christian faith.
Thank you, Professor Genazzani.
Yes, I would like to go on this point also because, you know, I am a practitioner of reproductive medicine. I was part of the development. I am more than 80s. Then I was starting with Bob Edwards. He was a very close friend of mine. And then we, as it was mentioned before, reproductive medicine and assisted reproduction have introduced a huge series of unbelievable questions, which are not the fact of the possibility to fertilize an ovum, but also to analyze and to follow human diseases, to follow genetic diseases, to approach problems that we were never thinking about. First of all, I suppose that you all agree that we can act on the genome, and if we have a specific genetic diseases that we have to try to correct in specific individual. This is something that with the evolution is not totally well defined, and I have the problem, or the ethical problem of how to evaluate the methodology and how to be sure of the methodology, not only of the efficacy, but also of the safety of the methodology, also not only for this specific, only in this individual, but also for the future one. But this is something that in which we are strongly engaged. We also agree that we have a series of new aspects coming on this research. But if you see what happened in nature, certainly assisted reproductive technology is a very not safe methodology. In nature, we never were thinking that we will have a vast stage of embryos as we've seen in the assisted reproductive technologies. Certainly, the woman, she's possibly fertile every month, but we don't have every month a pregnancy. But certainly the number of embryos that we lose, this indicate that this methodology at the end have also aspects of unsafety for the embryo, which have not totally been considered up to now, also because all the fertilization process that it happened now in the external out of the human womb, it's done with methodologies which are still going on and improving. Then what happened 10 years ago or 15 years ago was full of, not of voluntary mistakes, but full of mistake by our ignorance. And this is something who put a lot of concern. But certainly we have strict rules that everything can be done with the aim to treat a disease or to face a specific problem, not to improve anything which cannot be improved. And then I would like, as a personal experience in this area, to tell you the difficulty that we have also with ourselves and that we had in these past years looking what happened in the daily practice. But we don't have more solution. The solution is to bring back to the education and the possibility of humans to make pregnancies when is the proper time. And if you go in the Bible, the pregnancy can start very early in humans. And the couple, they normally start in the very early time, while now they are coming too late. And also, when it's too late, the right to reproduce in most of the individual is already lost. And they ask our help when the naturality of the event is already lost in the dark. And then this is something that the society have to make some action to save these problems, to try to bring back the family, to start in earlier time, and to give more possibility to the young.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Giordano.
Yeah, thank you. This is an interesting point. I think Buddhism, probably because its vision of life being regulated by the law, the fundamental law of cause and effect, it really brings, probably shifts the attention onto the issue of responsibility, of why we do things. That's a core question that I think probably Buddhists can help to be placed. I'm not saying correctly, but at least to be placed. I'm saying these from the perspective of a scientist. It's interesting because the question as it came from Professor Stutsky was, should we or should we not intervene, which is a classic question. I'm a volcanologist that, for example, civil protection asked me, should we or should not we evacuate or do things or do that? But the problem is that we deal with complexity, where there are a lot of uncertainties around, and we have discussed, we've heard excellent talks today. It's complicated. So what religions could do, certainly some help is to provide questions to be answered. With this, I want to, out of the talks today, I remember two things that are very interesting. One, I can't remember who was the speaker, but it presented, probably was one of the young presenters, about innovation drives needs versus needs driving innovation. I think this very much is something that pertains to scientists before than but also to society at large, because what we think it's a need, it also depends on our ethic values. And this brings back to what Professor Giannazzara was saying, that why now we give birth to kids so late, because it's part of our values. It's all part of our values. So I think that from the Buddhist perspective, there are two issues that are important that I want to mention here. One is really to bring back, to use any of these kind of occasions, and again, I really want to thank the organizers, because this is pretty amazing, to focus on the real questions that are behind the drivers of these new frontiers that we are crossing. Why are we doing this? Where are we? Because if we find the truth behind the direction we are taking, maybe we find out that maybe it's correct, but maybe we find out that maybe it's wrong, and we can decide that it's wrong. And the second thing is the value of these kind of multidisciplinary, multicultural, multi-religious commissions, but not only at, let's say, this kind of level. They need to get down to support maybe also the individual decision. I think when it comes to the single, family that needs to decide whether or not to undertake a cure or something, an innovative cure, who is going to support them in reality? So there is an issue of scaling of what we're doing here to be really helpful to the individual scientist as much as to the individual person who needs to take the decision.
Thank you. Professor Ilkelic, would you like to respond?
Yes, I would like to make in this important question two remarks. The first one is, I think we need a balance between freedom and responsibility. So, as we learned from famous German philosopher Immanuel Kant, freedom is not I can do everything what I wish. So freedom is I can do what is responsible for me and for others. And therefore, I think this distinction is very, very important. And in this context, German Jewish philosopher Hans Jonas said the main question of our modern century is, should we do everything what is technically possible? And I think this is the key question also for bioengineering and intervention in the human genome. And second point, what we not discussed today, maybe we can discuss tomorrow, during intervention into human genome and bioengineering interventions, we shaped our self-perception. So perception of the understanding of humankind. And the question is, what does mean? I think in this context, maybe the monotheistic and other religions can give some, I would say, foundations for thinking, for ethical reflection, because it's changing. But through this changed self-perception of humankind, we try to understand and we try to evaluate on the ethical level the new interventions. And I think we need this self-reflection in this context. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was wondering as I was listening that there's a general agreement and openness that we all actually want to participate in this discussion. How could this be practically realized? How can we invite the religions into the discussion, into the discourse? Will it be enough to say we invite them to the table and have an ethical discourse with them, which I'm sure will be very fruitful and important? And then I was thinking about this rich tradition, this enormous tradition of words, of narration, of symbols that the religions have. I mean, the way language has been painted over centuries and thousands of years, could that help us with our problems of communicating this very difficult and complicated science language to the public? Maybe this would be one way into the discussion. I don't know. I'm asking you.
Yes. I think religious leaders in all aspects of religions should or have the role of being mediators of the values which their respective religion has with the scientific community. Obviously, in a hermeneutical dialogue, you don't go to say what you have to say or to teach or to dictate, but you go there to listen and to learn. And I think this is the hermeneutical approach we need with the scientific community. Obviously, religions, I think the mentality that today the scientists must remain on their own and closed in their own bubble to discuss these issues, it's no longer tenable. Habermas has so much defended the idea of public debate with all stakeholders in society who have an equal footing in a democratical deliberations, in a democratic society. And I think religious leaders and the religious communities should not hesitate to sound their values, their symbols, their narrative perspective on these issues. I think how to bridge our language to the scientific and to the secular world and the postmodern world, that is the main challenge. Because if we go and we use the language in a pure religious, which might be anachronistic in today's world, we don't create any dialogue, but we need to find and to coach our values in a secular way which are understandable to the scientific community and to the postmodern world. But we have to start with believing that we can contribute, and we have a lot to contribute to the debate, because science is there to master nature, to make progress, to advance, but religions, like philosophy, raises the fundamental question: what is the goal? What are the means which are used in order to reach that goal? And one of the basic principles, which I think it's common to all the religions represented in this table, is that not everything that is technologically possible is ethically permissible. We have been quoting Hans Jonas, we have been quoting others. This is a fundamental principle, maxim in the Catholic tradition. And I think that is very important, but how to spell out that in the different technologies, which is quite challenging because it's moving on. It's the more we get knowledge, the more we get scientific knowledge, we have to reframe our presuppositions. We have to reframe. So we cannot remain static in our position only. We have to learn from the scientific community. We have to be dynamic and ready to change in order to be mediators of our narratives and values to the scientific community and to the public at large.
Thank you very much, Professor Agius. There is a question or a comment from our online forum.
Yes, we have an input for the panel, and maybe it's another aspect of what was yet not discussed, but for example, there is a comment that in science we intervene with the genome not only to do something like a therapy, but also to understand nature or to learn something, right? And in that sense, intervention with the genome is also about understanding and thus making visible the creation of God. So maybe somebody from the panel would like to comment on that?
Yes, I thank you very much for the question, because this was one problem of my life. If a scientist, I will observe the rearrangement of the chaos facing me or the image of God. I think that going now, personally, I've more seen the face of God, but I have seen a face that I am discovering day after day. And the evolution of science gives me the possibility to approach more for what is written, for the last dialogues that I will have. I think that I agree that we have to take care of the technological development and their ethical application. But I am not afraid to discover new realities. When we see what astronomy, what the new image we have of the universe, what we see in the universe now with the more advanced sound is what is written in the first line of the Bible. At the beginning was the chaos, and then it started the creation. And in 6th day we went out, the man was created. I think this is with my humility of being a daily gynecologist, what I have seen and what I've published in my publication is the admiration of the beautifulness of the create.
Last
Yes,
short
thank
comment.
you for these questions. So I can give from the Islamic tradition some answers to this question. We use in the Arabic term ayat. Ayat means on the one hand Quranic verse, but on the other hand the parts of the nature. So in the Islamic philosophical tradition, it is no difference between the understanding of Quranic verse and the understanding of the nature. So therefore we have so many philosophers, theologians, and at the same time scientists. Some example would be Al-Razi is also important, I think, in the Christian tradition and the other points. And therefore, the humankind have to learn through the functioning of the nature, the God, and vice versa. And therefore, I think there are so many similarities, but the context is, I think, very important. So in the modern biology, I think maybe it's a little bit a provocative thesis, but you have to be at first atheist, then you can understand some theories and so on. And in the Islamic tradition, we don't have the context. And the natural sciences and theological phenomena and philosophical positions are comparable, and we can have a holistic approach to these points. Thank you.
So we have to conclude this interesting panel. So thanks a lot to all speakers. And I think that is an opportunity to open an approach and discussion and try to go on with this kind of dialogue and to see in which way the religion and different traditions can contribute to all these aspects that we analyze today and will analyze tomorrow. So now we conclude, we end the online streaming, and so we say goodbye to all participants online, and we start tomorrow morning at 9:15 for the second day of our work. So many thanks to everybody.